Welcome, everybody, to Unvarnished Football. This week's episode, we are going to discuss the Maxx Crosby no trade. We're going to discuss some free agency moves. I'm Michael Jackson of the Game Before the Money. With me, as always, former NFL executive Upton Bell, who was director of player personnel for the Colts under Don Shula in the 60s, and when they won Super Bowl V under head coach Don McCaffrey. And he was GM of the New England Patriots. He was owner of the World Football League's Charlotte Hornets. So he knows a lot about trades. He knows a lot about what goes on behind them. And we're going to talk about the Maxx Crosby no trade, no trade, failed physical. I want to bring up two things first. Two failed physicals that I remember that stand out. One was Eric Dickerson failing a physical with the Green Bay Packers after being traded to the Packers. How about that?
Yeah,
A lot of y'all probably don't remember that. And also, Drew Brees failed a physical with the Dolphins, and then he signed with the Saints. Now look at what happened there. So are physicals subjective? You get different opinions from doctors. That's what I'm gonna. That's what I'm gonna kick this off with. And Upton, why don't you give your perspective on things?
well, I first and foremost think that number one, that the Raiders were saying to themselves, if we can get two number ones, what suckers can we find? And they found temporarily suckers in the Baltimore Ravens. But on the other hand, the Ravens are probably thinking to themselves, and I've gone through all of this with doctors and with players, and particularly with knee injuries. I don't care whether it's a meniscus or what it is. A knee injury at the age of 29 spells to me sayonara. Now, if the Ravens had in the readiness a deal for Trey Hendrickson and could get him, I'm going to take the younger Hendrickson. He might not be Maxx Crosby, but again, the NFL has changed in a great deal in that now that every player is really his own manager, and every player doesn't necessarily play for dear old team. They play for themselves and how much money they can make in a short period of time. All of that being said is, I say pox on both their houses. Number one, the Raiders, feeling any remorse for sending a guy that basically was just recovering from a knee injury at the age of soon to be 29 and getting two number ones. They must have been sitting there and saying, my God, we have really screwed the pooch here, as, as they would say. And on the other hand, the Ravens are saying to themselves, well, let's be careful here. Great to have this guy. We can maybe even use him part-time. But if we've got in the bag Trey Hendrickson, we'll take the shot on this guy. What I don't understand is if you have maybe Hendrickson as either a backup or a guy that you're now going to bring in, why would you give up two number twos or two number ones for a guy that again is 29 years old coming off a knee injury? That to me doesn't sound right. And I listened to the Ravens general manager go on and try every routine possible right on the NFL vaudeville show to try and explain this whole thing and act like they're kind of shocked by it. That's BS.
Now, did you have any situations where you acquired a player and then they failed a physical?
Well, yes and no, and that's the subject of an article in the Athletic today. Just looking at the situation of I kind of they interviewed me and I kind of took them back. It was on another story that they are doing, that Mike Sando, one of the top writers at The Athletic, is doing on the NFL and general managers and how everything is escalated in their world. And basically, I was telling him about a deal that I made that was a deal, but not a deal, which was I always thought that Dwayne Thomas was one of the great running backs of his time. I kind of compared him coming out of college to Jim Brown. And of course, he went on to be Rookie of the Year with the Dallas Cowboys, playing against us in the Super Bowl. Even though he fumbled a couple of times, I still said when I became the Patriots general manager that that's the guy that I wanted to start with.
And
And basically,
just to bring people back quickly, bring people up to speed if they don't know who Dwayne Thomas was. He was probably a top five running back, maybe certainly top 10 in the early 70s before they moved the hash marks together. He was averaging about 800 yards a season, which was really good for that time. And again, that was before they moved the hash marks closer together, which helped the running game considerably. So Dwayne Thomas, every football fan knew who Dwayne Thomas was at the time.
well, and they remember. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So what I saw was that Thomas discovered not well he discovered he claimed that his agent sold him out at $21,000. Can you imagine this? Today that's pocket change. $21,000 a year on like a 3-year contract to the shrewdest general manager in all of football at the time, Tex Schramm of the Dallas Cowboys. He became bitter about the situation, and in the off season, uh, he basically, said he didn't want to go back to the Cowboys. He made all sorts of threatening moves, and in those days there was no free agency, so where the hell were you going to go? But basically, he wanted to kind of shoot himself out of Dallas, shoot his way out of Dallas. Now there were questions of some people that he got involved with. Was he on drugs? Wasn't he on drugs? So I looked at the situation and said, we have a running back by the name of Carl Garrett who's been in all sorts of trouble himself, understanding that the coach that I inherited uh, loved Garrett, let Garrett get away with murder, and basically I decided why not trade up Garrett to Dallas, and of course in Dallas he'd be under a more controlled situation. Tex Schramm loved Carl Garrett, and so therefore we made the deal that it would be Garrett for Dwayne Thomas and my number one choice. And of course, what happened was after trading for him, I was in Canton, Ohio, actually presenting as one of the presenters, and actually had a conversation that night, which I told Mike Sando about, with Richard Nixon, who happened to be the president of the United States and was there for one of the big dedications. I ended up talking to him because I was a presenter too, and Nixon, who knew a lot about football, and all I was really looking for, it'd be like if I called you and said, Michael, convince me, uh, why shouldn't I trade for Dwayne Thomas? And of course, you being, you know, a historian and the man who wrote the game before the money, you would say to me, oh my God, what a great story. Yeah, why wouldn't you trade for him? Carl Garrett for Dwayne Thomas any day of the week, even with your number one. And this is what kind of, I'm paraphrasing, Nixon was saying to me. And so when I left there, I got back to my hotel, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, consummated the deal with Tex Schramm to send Dwayne Thomas to New England. So the next day, I was late getting back, and he had already reported early. And reportedly, the doctor there, who was there to, examine him, said that he fell down the stairs. I said, how the hell did that happen? And he just said, I don't know. He said, but I'm a little suspicious. So I said, don't test him yet, doctor. So the next day, and today you could never get away with this, but the next day, he was ready to go out on the field, and he and I had negotiated a new contract. I mean, I knew he was getting screwed, and I figured, what better way than to win the player at least off the field with a new, better contract at better than $21,000 a year. So he goes out on the field, and the coach, who then wanted to pay me back, and his loss of Carl Garrett, actually, because Thomas wouldn't, get in the 3-point stance, he said we stand straight up in the Dallas offense. The coach used it as an example to throw him off the field. And of course, when he came back in, he was really upset. The coach was upset. I'm in the middle of the whole situation. So I called the league office, and I had hired Peter Hathase, who used to work there, and I said, we need to get on the phone with Pete Rozelle and negate this deal. So over a period of the next 2 or 3 days, we found a way to negate the deal. I sent Dwayne Thomas back to Dallas, got Carl Garrett back, had to give them a 2 and a 3, but then Rozelle ruled in my favor for getting back the number 1 that I had traded to Dallas. How was I able to do this? Sleight of hand. I said, well, we never gave him a physical. So if we didn't give him a physical, there was no way for me to flunk him in the physical, which wouldn't have been, what was he going to say? We're flunking him because he did drugs, or what did he do? So all of it could end up in the end in a very bad place. But this way, I sent him back, got Garrett back, not that I wanted him back, and then retained my number 1, which was the most important thing.
Yeah.
How's that for a puzzle?
Wow. I mean, my goodness, you got Nixon in that story. You got a player getting a better contract, which is what he wanted, but then immediately, going at odds with the coaching staff about being in a three-point stance, and then
well, Michael, Mazur, the coach, just did it to piss me off and to say I don't want this guy, and that's the way it was written too in the Boston Globe, and I knew exactly what he was doing, and I figured, okay, this is never going to work. This guy doesn't want him, and I'm going to have to live with that. So how do I get my assets back?
Now, Dwayne Thomas was out of football for a couple of years after having those 2 really great seasons for the Cowboys. And then he played for Washington for a couple of seasons, but he never really never
did. And the reason was, his life was really screwed up. Ironically, for cursing the Cowboys, he went back, and in the first game that we played against the Cowboys, which was later on in the season, he had a hell of a day. And I said to myself, you know what? I'll never forgive this coach for doing this, because he had a great day against us. And then, of course, he had a great game in the Super Bowl versus Miami when Dallas finally won their first Super Bowl. And Thomas, in that famous interview afterwards with Tom Brookshire, but maybe I know people don't remember it, he never would answer any questions that Brookshire asked him, and actually stared him down. I mean, it looked like Brookshire, who had played in the NFL, was a great player, was scared to death of Thomas. And he could give you that type of stare and be that type of person. He went on to have a great year, and then kind of faded out of football. I don't know whether it was drugs or his disillusionment about it, but ironically, he ended up in the league that I was in just briefly in the World Football League.
Wow, wow, yeah, and he is one of those. If you
The
look back
great
and
what ifs.
yeah, great what ifs. That's a great way to put it. Now, uh, talking about trading two number one picks for a player. Now, off the top of my head, what I remember, and Coach Levy, Marv Levy, had shared this story with me for the Game Before the Money podcast, was how he traded two number one picks to obtain Cornelius Bennett. And I'm going to bring up Eric Dickerson again because that coincidentally was the trade that ended up sending Cornelius Bennett to the Colts. It was a multi-team deal. But Cornelius Bennett was a top draft choice that year. He was a younger player. But that trade turned out great for Buffalo. Cornelius Bennett, really an important part of the defense that got them to 4 straight Super Bowls. And boy, the way things worked out, they ended up picking Thurman Thomas in the second round the next year. And they probably would have picked a different running back in the first round over Thurman Thomas. So things really worked out for Buffalo in that deal. So trading two number ones for a player, and in this case he was a younger player, but that can really work out well. And sometimes with a different draft strategy, you might end up with a better player than who you might have picked in round one.
Well, it's funny because I interviewed Cornelius Bennett, and I flew to Buffalo to interview him, and he was a terrific player, and actually was a great interview. And sometimes deals work out, but boy, I'm awful careful about trading not only a number one, but two number ones for somebody. And again, back to Maxx Crosby. Cornelius Bennett was a young player and one of the best. Maxx Crosby might come back and have a great year. But in today's present NFL, when you're 29, you're an old man. And when you're 29 and you've got a bad knee or recovering from a bad knee, sayonara. That's what I don't get here.
Well, I could see taking a chance on him. I could see bringing him in. We were talking about this um, earlier. Bringing him in like the Eagles did with Claude Humphrey. They took Claude Humphrey from the Falcons um, in 1980, before the 1980 season. And they played Claude Humphrey, a handful of plays per game. And you put in a guy like a superstar defensive lineman in for 10 plays, 15 plays a game, and they're going to manhandle people. Whether they're 100% healthy or not, they just know how to play the game better. And I think Maxx Crosby could do that. Now, that's probably not worth two number one picks, certainly.
Not my two number ones.
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah, but
No.
the thing is now we don't know. There's kind of this cloud over Maxx Crosby of how healthy is he? How is he still healthy? Is this a Drew Brees kind of situation where you've got a guy?
Well, Brees was yeah, but Michael Brees, I think, was much younger at the time, and it was Nick Saban that rejected him, as I remember. But again, if I'm sitting I still want to call them Oakland because as far as I'm concerned, they are Oakland. But if I'm sitting in Las Vegas, and by the way, the real general manager is not that owner, my God, Mark Davis. But should be Mark, not a clue, Davis. and you know that Brady is really calling all the shots. And as one writer here in Boston said today, shame on them. But that's Brady. Anything that Brady does, other than having a facelift, which he's had, anything that he does, I would stay away from. Period. And you know what? He could end up being the worst thing that happened to the Raiders too. But this has Brady's hands in it. And listen, again, if it were Al Davis, I said, boy, Al Davis did it again. He's just screwed somebody and got the best of the deal. If it was Al Davis, and you know what? If it was Al Davis, I guarantee you Baltimore never would have made that deal. They would have said, oh my God, they probably sent us some guy that can't walk on two legs. So there's the difference.
Well, now, do you remember any specific certain circumstances where Al Davis sent a player somewhere, and then they either ended up feeling their physical or just not being the player they used to be?
Oh, I can't be specific because I don't think it was ever for a high choice. But people always used to say in any trade, beware of Al Davis. Now, I liked Davis because I thought I didn't like certain things he did, but he and I became kind of close in some ways. In fact, one of the writers from the eastern part of the country, Vinny Trattini, of the Long Island Press, wrote, Upton Bell thinks he's the Al Davis of the East. But what I liked about Davis was his football knowledge, his ability to get people to play for him, the whole idea of the kind of the Raiders, the black menacers and all of that other stuff. I really liked. But first and foremost, Davis was really a football guy. You don't have as many real football guys like that today. But any time that I was thinking about trading with him, I'd say, I'm not going to do it. I like certain things about Al, but I'm not going to take any of his players.
All right. Well, let's kind of look at a few things. Moving on from the Maxx Crosby no trade, let's kind of look at some moves that other teams are making. Kansas City signing Super Bowl MVP Kenneth Walker Jr. They let Isaiah Pacheco go. Pacheco did a great job, I thought, for Kansas City in his role. But they're going with a younger player in Walker. Pacheco going to the Lions. What do you think of that move for both teams? There, the Lions ended up trading David Montgomery to the Texans.
They did because they have their super running back, so they were able to do that. The Lions were, but also I want to say overall, after all the dust settles, how many teams really helped each other? How many teams? I'm sorry, how many teams actually helped themselves? I'm betting in the end very, very few. All of this moving of bodies and everything else, it sounds great. You get it all on ESPN and all these breathless announcements, but in the end, as I see every year, how many teams really did help themselves? Now, Kansas City traded their best defensive back, McDuffie, to the Rams for a number one. Now, what Kansas City's moves tells me in some ways is that they're still have to be concerned about the quarterback and how he recovers from his knee injury. But they have to figure, what, we need to get younger. They wasted a couple of years by not really making a lot of moves and thought that they could keep playing it back. And of course, the shock was the loss to the Philadelphia Eagles in the Super Bowl 2 years ago. Really basically was a wake-up call that they should have started to move on to begin with. And then when Patrick Mahomes gets that devastating knee injury. Who knows, by the way, Michael, what he's going to be returning from it? I know people today recover a lot faster, and there's so many different ways of operating on somebody and getting them ready to play again. But I see Kansas City's moves as not only getting younger, although they brought back Travis Kelce. Jesus, you talk about bringing back the buried, but they're doing it for another year. But in other areas, they're getting younger. The question is, and the Rams think now that they've got McDuffie, that their defense, which kind of let them down in the playoffs, when they really were, in my opinion, the best team in the NFL, period. They think that they've now got a guy that will put them over the top. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. But what is Kansas City, all their moves now? Their moves is to get younger and get draft choices, and I'm not sure that Patrick Mahomes will start the season.
Well, and here's the thing, and you brought up, okay, well, what is he going to be like this year? And historically, I'm going to bring up two guys just off the top of my head. We see Mahomes always, when you think of him, you think about a guy who can run around, extend plays, make fantastic plays, a lot of times as a result of his feet. Now, a lot of people aren't going to remember this, but Aaron Rodgers was a very mobile quarterback at the beginning of his career, and he could do the same thing. Now, he had to adjust his game later in his career. Bob Greasy was another. I know a lot of you are thinking, like, Bob Greasy, a running quarterback, but he was at the beginning of his career.
Yep.
Yeah. So and then after he broke his leg in the 1972 season, he had to adjust his game. Now, if there's a guy who can adjust his game, I mean, I certainly believe Patrick Mahomes is the caliber of player who's going to be able to do that. But we don't know. We might see a different Patrick Mahomes. It's just kind of one of those things that happen, and those are just two examples off the top of my head of guys that had injuries and they had to adjust their game. It's kind of like a fastball pitcher becoming a finesse pitcher later in his career to extend his effectiveness.
Well, yeah, that might be true, but in the case of Patrick Mahomes, more than most, Patrick Mahomes, the greatest concern a defense would have in playing against Patrick Mahomes is his ability. I mean, he isn't a designed run quarterback, maybe occasionally, but when he's back there and he's under the rush and he can escape the rush and then make it into a big gain, and also when he escapes, particularly up the middle, and then throws that dart 50 yards on the run, that's a big part that could be taken away. You don't know that. None of us know that. And so I think in his case, Greasy was, a scrambler in Miami before Shula got there, or a scrambler somewhat in college. But, I mean, that was his game. And then when they got Zonka and Kick and then got Warfield, he didn't have to do any of that. In the case of Mahomes, I really think I think what you see with Patrick Mahomes is what you get, and that's his game. And if that's taken away in some shape or form, and if I'm the coach, I want him to run less, no matter what it is. Then you have totally changed his game. I think it's hard to take away that ability that always scared defenses. In his case, I think that would be devastating.
Well, we'll have to see how he recovers. Hopefully he'll still be the same exciting player. Although those knee injuries can be really difficult and can be career changing. I believe in Mahomes as a student of the game and as a passer. I think he'd be able to be an excellent football player still. I think another guy that jumps into my head that really adjusted his game, and people are not going to remember him as a running quarterback, but Terry Bradshaw definitely became more of a pocket passer um, later in his career.
He did, but again, uh, he was never the same, in my opinion. I mean, I think Terry Bradshaw is one of the most overlooked quarterbacks of all time. I think the four championships, the four Super Bowls that he brought them without ever losing one, is way underrated. I still consider him, no matter what they say about today's quarterbacks and Brady and all of them, I still consider him and those Steeler teams among the best I've ever seen. And he's never gotten. I actually saw him at Louisiana Tech, and actually saw him play basketball. And he was. I remember saying to Chuck Noll at the Senior Bowl when Bradshaw was there, I said, I've never seen a guy throw harder than Terry Bradshaw. I said, but the other thing is the guy is such a devastating runner. I mean, he was big for his time. You know, he was like 215 pounds, Michael, and 6'2", which was considered big, 6'2", 6'2" and a half. I mean, I've never seen an arm at that time like his, and his ability to run. And if you remember, in the first couple of years when they were losing all the time, I mean, that's all he had to do was to run for his life. But I don't think once you lose that ability, who's the guy? Think about it. The guy that never got hurt or rarely got hurt, and was a scrambler from beginning to end of his career. Mr. Minnesota Vikings quarterback, the guy that is always
Fran
been
Tarkenton.
there,
Yeah.
Fran Tarkenton. I've run into him. I used to run into him occasionally when I owned my team in Charlotte, and he was over in Georgia, and I would run into him, and it looked like he could play tomorrow. I mean, he never. All the guys, I can remember our players saying, "I want to hit that little son of a bitch. I want to nail his ass," and nobody ever got him. I mean, even guys that tried to hit him going out of bounds, he was so elusive that nobody ever touched him. And you would figure there's a guy that would be hurt midway in his career, like these guys. He never was really injured, and escaped, and was able to run to the very end of his career. An amazing story.
And you talked about the '70s Steelers, and of course the Vikings and Steelers took on each other in Super Bowl IX, with the Steelers winning. Bradshaw at quarterback over Tarkenton. And you'd also earlier asked the question, how much are these teams helping themselves by free agency? Now, those Steeler teams, and I think it was, forgive me if I'm getting it confused with another season, but I think it was the 1979 Steelers that won Super Bowl 14. There wasn't, and I understand there were different times, there wasn't a single player on that Steeler team that had played for another team. Okay? So, and then you think about the 49ers in the 80s. Again, this is pre-free agency. But what they did, when they picked up players, from other teams, a lot of times it was later in their career. They got Louis Kelcher and Gary Johnson away from the Chargers, at the end of their careers. So when their starters need a little bit of rest, well, they're bringing in Louis Kelcher, who was a fantastic player. a lot of times teams supplement um, through free agency with veterans who bring a lot to the locker room rather than every play on the field. That happens a lot. The only really big signing that I can remember really changing things, and ironically, it was one of the first, if not the first, free agency signings, was Reggie White going
Oh
to the
yeah, he
Packers.
changed every.
He changed
He changed.
everything. But how many other Tampa Bay signing Tom Brady? But how many other free agent signings, just straight up free agent signings? I like you said, how much are teams helping themselves? How many others have really brought home a championship? I don't know if you can
I
say many.
Well, let me put it this way. I have two feelings about this, and one feeling which I'm going to share with the Athletic when I talk to them again is this: when you had no free agency and players stayed with teams forever or were cut at a certain time in their career, there was, even if there wasn't on the team's part, there was a loyalty to the team and to the organization. You were there until you were either cut or traded for life. Now, if you look at it today and you say, "My God, they're in servitude to these teams," and particularly during that period when like a Tex Schramm could say to a Dwayne Thomas, "You're here, forget it. We're going to pay you what we want." But what was given up when you went to free agency is the whole idea. Everybody now is a free agent. Everybody can go do what they want eventually, although not completely, because you can be franchised if you're really great by a team, and then you have to be paid at a rate of what the best players make. But still, the problem is that you lose that kind of loyalty to a club, even if the club turns you out at a certain age or gets rid of you or has total control of you. But now that you're a free agent, you are literally with everybody has an agent today. You can go where you please in many cases, particularly if you're not a top echelon player, but a team thinks that they need to improve things, and maybe help themselves a little bit for the next year. That's fine. But you lose that whole life. Everybody is a free agent now in many ways. And by that, I also mean I'm here for you today. This is a player. I'm here for you today. Tomorrow I might be there for somebody else. I think you lose something in that. I don't think the fans care one way or another, but I do think, how do you build a team if you're constantly moving players in and out? You build it. You only build it for the year. That's it. You're not really building for the long run because you're looking around the corner and thinking, who the hell can I get tomorrow? So you see what I mean? I understand the reality of where the game is now and how popular it is, maybe eventually worldwide, but something has been lost. I can't fully define it, but all I know is before free agency, when I worked for the Colts, and when I came to the Patriots, and then again owning my own team, there was a sense, in my case, of a kind of a two-way street, that basically I want to treat this guy in a certain way. Now I could care less. It's what I need for tomorrow, not what I need for the long run. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, a couple of things, a couple of conversations I had with former players. You kind of reminded me of first. There was one time I was getting to chat with Thurman Thomas, and I talked to him about playing before free agency, and he brought up the fact that at least in his case, and of his opinion, what he saw from other players was Ralph Wilson, the owner of the Bills. He took care of the players, and I hear this. I heard this a lot about Bud Adams too. If players needed money, the owners would help them out. If they needed money to help buy a house, or they were having some financial troubles, they would pay them outside of their contract. And in Thurman Thomas's case, he said that Ralph Wilson paid him what Thurman Thomas, thought he was worth, and kept him happy to help keep the team together. So there was that aspect, and you may have seen that with Carroll Rosenblum. In fact, I think I've heard stories about him doing the same.
Oh my God! Well, my father, when he was still alive as commissioner, had to a couple of times call him and say, "Carroll, you can't do this. You can't be giving bonuses for this and that. It's against the league rules." I mean, he was paying his players over and under the table. He was a full-time sucker. If you were a player with the Colts, even when I got there, if you pretended like something was really wrong with the family, wherever else it is, Rosenblum took care of you, and that was the feeling. Now these guys today would say, "Screw you, I'm going to get what I can get in the period of time I did." I just think I could be wrong, Michael, and that's why I'm throwing it out to you and to the audience, is that what I saw during that period of time was a sense of feeling that you are part of a club. I mean, I can remember when rookies would come to the Colts, and they had, I don't know if they have it anymore at any team, and they had the rookie show. And the rookies would get up and perform. This was at training camp. And then afterwards, the veterans would say to them, "Now you are part of the Colts. You are part of the team." Probably it's Alice in Wonderland. Suckers are bored every day. But I just have a feeling, even though you were subservient on a team, that basically they were happier times. I want to point out I could be totally wrong, but now what I'm doing is I'm selling myself to the highest bidder. That's what I'm doing.
Right, and that brings me to another thing, that the other conversation that I wanted to talk about, and that was with Chad Hennings, who was part of the Cowboys' Super Bowl victories in the '90s when they won 3 out of 4. And he said that once free agency hit, and the Cowboys were really, the first dynasty that kind of got broke up by free agency, because free agency became the rule in 1993. And he said that when they started to bring in other free agents to replace the players that they had lost or retired, he said the problem was not everybody bought into the same culture. So you had this core championship ball club who have one standard and who are committed to playing at a very high level together and sacrificing for teams. And then you're bringing in hired guns to supplement that. And so you've got, like you said, now it's like, okay, I'm gonna look for the money a lot of the time. So I'm gonna look for a higher paycheck. And hey, that's not any different than any other profession in the world. Okay? If somebody's gonna hire me a lot more money than what I'm making now, doing now, I'm gonna probably take that job. So, and especially if it's in a place that I'd rather live in than the town I'm living in right now. So there are a lot of things that came out of it, but one of the things is as far as team culture, and I think this is something that gets overlooked. Um, how does the star player fit in to the team culture? The new signees, how do they understand the culture? It's kind of like what you said about the rookies. The rookies would come in, they'd buy into the culture, they'd become a part of it. Veteran players, they maybe aren't as shapeable, as malleable, or as open to buying into the culture.
But so what we're really at a standoff now. The players are bigger, stronger, quicker, faster. The game in some ways is better. But what about the foundation of the game? I mean, they're already talking here now with a couple of the players, including Drake May, that if they don't by next year, sign him to a contract of like 60 or 70 million, it could be 90 million. I'm saying, when does it become too much? When do we get to the point of where this is just getting ridiculous? For am I going to pay in any other business for somebody that might last 3 or 4 years in a very violent sport? Am I going to pay him $90 million? Am I going to pay one of the bright young defensive backs at the Patriots, Gonzalez? Am I am I going to pay him 60 or 70 million dollars? I mean, well, at what point does it get too much? And how long can this bubble before it breaks continue? Now, and I know I'm off on another tangent, but now they're talking about playing yet another game this time the day before Thanksgiving on a Wednesday night. And I know what's going to happen. In the end, the fan is going to pay more money. You're going to have to go to more and more streaming services. I mean, everything is getting out of whack here to the point of, does any football player, hey, listen, it's a world of get everything you can get, but does any player worth $90 million a year?
Well, it depends. Excuse me. To me, that depends on how much the teams are making, and they're just making more and more money. Um,
For the time being.
as streaming deals enter, and right now the league, and it's been this way for a long time, they're in the driver's seat in terms of negotiating how much money they're bringing in on broadcasting and now streaming deals. Um, and so they're able to pay that out. Um, you know, I just
right now,
right now,
right now,
right now, and we don't know how things are going to change. Or
but,
if
but,
they'll
but, but,
change.
but we're back to, let me put it in this way. And when I got into radio and television, and 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 as I went along, made more and more and more money. What I can tell you is the happiest time. They used to have non-compete clauses. So if I worked at WBZ Radio, which was the biggest operation in this part of the country, if I wanted to leave and I had offers to go other places, which I did, they had a thing called a non-compete clause, which meant that I would have to wait a year or two after leaving. And in a couple of cases, I did do that. But I can tell you, if you ask me, when was the happiest part of my life in radio and television? It's when I made less money and worked at a place that I absolutely loved and was the biggest outlet that controlled radio and television in New England. I didn't care that I was going to make a few bucks less what I liked was being with that organization. And that's the way it is in radio and television now too, as well as sports. So, what makes you happy? Does it make you happy that I can say I'm $90 million, or does it make you happy that you're with a good organization that's trying to win? You know, most people will say, go get the most amount of money you can get because your career is short. But I see it a different way.
All right, Upton, and I think that's kind of how I feel about things too. Um, but I understand when players feel the other way about it, especially with this much money at stake and how hard they've worked to get to where they're at. And like you say, the window is small in which they can make that amount of money.
It is small, but what's it say about your organization? Oh, my God, we're going to have a turnover of 10, 15 players this year. I mean, that's basically when you're looking at it, how stable can your organization be where you're constantly changing every year?
Exactly, and that brings it back to the culture. I mean, how long can you hold that winning culture when
Year
you
by
have
year.
it?
1 year at a time. That's it.
All right, Upton. Is there anything else you think is important? Any other free agency deals or any other trades that have happened? Rashawn Gary going to the Cowboys from the Packers. The Packers, making a few moves in free agency, signing Hargrave.
What happened? What happens with the Vikings now? I mean, and did the Colts overpay for Daniel Jones? I mean, and Kyler Murray, is he going to end up in Minnesota where they have no quarterback? I mean, the kid that they drafted has turned out, as far as I'm concerned, to be a stiff. And so, do they gamble on a Kyler Murray, who to me just is a guy who can run around, is a terrific athlete, and can throw the ball fairly well. And he got a pile of money from the Cardinals, and now he's being cut. See you later. Other people are being cut. We'll see what happens, particularly with the quarterback. A team only is good to a degree as their quarterback, and that's what we see now. Is that basically there are 32 teams? How many of them really have good quarterbacks? And that's why they're overpaying for all of them.
Well, yeah, Malik Willis, you reminded me of going to the Dolphins. He signed a 3-year, $67.5 million deal with $45 million fully guaranteed, and that's coming off the Packers bench behind Jordan Love.
He's a backup quarterback. It shows you how desperate teams are. That's what they're doing. And even the quarterback that's cut, is a free agent, Kyler Murray. How about Cousins? Does Cousins go back to Minnesota? Or what about Pittsburgh? Is Aaron Rodgers back in his 50th year?
Yeah, with his old coach Mike McCarthy.
Yeah,
who
his old coach.
yeah.
Play it back till they get to the playoffs. And they get the playoffs, they're going nowhere.
All right, Upton. Well, we're going to do this again next week. Everybody, thanks so much for listening. And please visit thegamebeforethemoney.com. Please visit uptonbell.com. And also unvarnishedfootball.com. You can listen to our previous episodes. And we'll be coming at you again next Thursday. Until then, have fun.